Now to the real fun, dyeing. Please refer to my dyeing procedure PDF for actual dye amounts for each technique. Be sure that your fabric is washed before dyeing. We will dissolve 1 cup of soda ash in 1 gallon of hot tap water. Once it's dissolved, then soak the fabric for 15 to 30 minutes. Don't worry if it stays in the solution longer, just don't leave it in overnight. Mine usually stays in longer while I set up the dyeing area. Now, to set up the dyeing area, I like to have everything close at hand. Now, with your gloves on, remove your fabric from the soda ash, squeezing out any excess water. Put the wet fabric on the covered work surface, and we're going to start to manipulate the fabric with 2 different techniques. There are 2 ways that we're going to talk about how to manipulate fabric, and this is the first way. This is push folding. When I started dyeing, I was so careful to fan fold, but now the majority of the time I just push fold it. It's much easier and I get the same results. As you see, I am using rubber bands on the ends. You don't have to do that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But either way, it works out great. Just a real easy, fast technique. And this is scrunching, and basically if you see, I'm just taking from the center and just scrunching up, just little at a time, and just keep scrunching until you have a nice little piece of fabric. I'm straightening it out a little bit, and you can see it's almost done. We'll be ready to put it in the dye container. Now the folded fabric is placed in the dyeing containers and is ready to be dyed. If you've not read my PDF or watched my video on dye precautions, please do so before continuing. It's real important to make sure you're wearing a dust mask or a respirator and gloves when using these dyes. I'm demonstrating 3 ice dyeing techniques. For number 1 and number 3, we will add ice over the fabric. If I want specific placement for my dye colors, I will place my ice so I know where the fabric is. Otherwise, I just pile on the ice. Once the ice is on the fabric, I'll adjust it to make sure it covers every bit of the fabric. And this is how it looks, all covered with ice. So let's start with the first technique, my favorite. I sprinkle the dry dye over the ice. For a fat quarter, I am using 1/2 teaspoon of dye, usually. And I'll talk a little bit about that in another video. When dyeing different colors, I rinse my measuring spoon in the water container and wipe it off with my towel before dipping in the next color. If any of my dye is sitting on top of ice and still dry, I spritz with just a bit of water so there's no chance of the dye particles becoming airborne. This is the second technique. Here we are adding the dye to the fabric before adding the ice. For this technique, I use 1/2 teaspoon of dye for a fat quarter. Then we add the ice on top of the fabric. This is how it looks when it's ready to be batched. The last technique is adding water to the dye and then pouring it over the ice. For my fat quarter, I mix 7/8 of a teaspoon of dye in 1½ cups of water. Here are all the dyeing containers ready to set or to batch. The containers are left covered and left alone for 24 hours. Here's how number 1 looks after 24 hours. Here's how number 2 looks after 24 hours. And number 3 after 24 hours. Now for the exciting part. It's like opening a present. You start rinsing with cold water. You can see my Tyvek label on this shot. Continue rinsing until the water runs clear. Then increase the temperature of the water from cool to warm to hot. Add Blue Dawn to hot tap water and let the fabric soak for at least 30 minutes, but you can leave it overnight. After 30 minutes, rinse quickly in warm water and then wash the fabric in the wash machine using a hot cycle with 2 rinses. Dry, iron, and enjoy your beautiful fabric. Here are the results using the same dye, brushed steel. This is technique number 1, where we sprinkle the dry dye on the ice. The colors are bold, and you can even see some yellow. For technique 2, the results are similar to number 1, except there is a lot of speckling from the dye. Also, you can see a lot more gray in this piece. This is a good technique if you want to control exactly where you place the dye. However, you might not like the speckles. For technique 3, you can tell that this is much lighter. I describe it as softer. Sometimes you might want that look. Because I prefer technique number 1, my samples will be ice dyed that way unless I indicate otherwise. Here are the 3 pieces side by side so you can make a comparison. All will give you great results. It just depends on what you like. That's all there is to the ice dyeing process. Now you're on your way to creating lots of beautiful fabric. I can't wait to see your pieces. If you have any questions, please ask below the video and stop in the Icy Delights Facebook group to share your fabric with the class.